So at this point, I just want to run over some of the basics for starting to create texture maps, right? We're going to do a couple more of these lectures next week and kind of do a couple more other map type paintings. But I figured it'd be great to get you kind of a nice, like, 15-minute lecture on starting that process again. So at this point, right, we were in the shading workspace from last time, and that's where we were kind of exploring how to plug in normal maps. You'll see this is actually the material that we'd already created before, right? But remember, one of the things you can actually do is, create a new material right here, create a new material right there, right? So if you don't have any materials at all, you can create one. You can highlight right here to name it, right? But even if you're in the shading workspace, you can actually create a new material from right here. Of course, tell which material you want to be on something there, and give it a name, right? And we're going to focus on the ship for today, but we'll do a little bit of stuff on the other parts just to kind of get some nice practice at that stuff. In fact, just to show you how to create that material for that, right, I'm just going to go to pipes here, select that object, and you can see it still has the UV grid on there, right? And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to say, you know what, I don't really need that anymore, so I can just, and I'm still in shading workspace, right? And I can just click on that, hit delete, right? And that gets rid of that texture on there. You'll also see it already kind of has that original material on there, right? Remember, new materials here, and here, and here, right? There's a couple of different buttons for it. But in this case, we already have a material on there. I can just rename it, right? I can rename it here. I can rename it here. We just call this like pipes, right? That way when we go and we look at, man, if I could type correctly, my hands were on the proper home keys. You'll notice now I have two materials, pipes and ship, right? So one of the interesting things you can see is how that kind of works. Make sure the UV map is fine. All right. And you can actually click on them and apply them. So in this case, pipes, and I'll put on pipes there. And you'll notice whatever object you click on, it'll show that different material. And you can actually easily apply that material just like that, right? Just switch it. So pretty straightforward there, but I'm going to hide the pipes for now. There we go. And I'm going to go to the texture paint workspace, right? The texture paint workspace. And I can see here that in Blender, you get two windows. It's the texture paint workspace is a lot like the UV editing workspace. You can kind of see your UV editor, where if you want to, you can do 2D painting. I do want to try to explore that a little bit with you guys on next week for the pipes, because we kind of straightened them to kind of highlight this a little bit. So we'll kind of do a little bit of stuff with that next week, just to kind of show that off. Like I said, you guys might not even have pipes for your ship. It's okay. So in this case, what I want to do is I don't really want to work in the 2D space here for now. I want to see more of the normal 3D space better. So remember, you can actually put your cursor over kind of the little line that divides the viewports, right? Because that's the 3D viewport, that's the UV viewport, or the 2D viewport. Technically, it's the paint viewport. You can see paint's actually turned on, which if you want to paint in here, you need to have that turned on. But you can actually minimize either of these views just by kind of left-click dragging on that little divider line there. So I can just kind of minimize that to kind of maximize this workspace here a little bit. Technically, you could always kind of switch them around or get rid of them in other ways, but for me, I'm like, I don't really want to change this viewport. I just want to maximize one of them, right? Just kind of make sure to get most of it available there. All right. In this case, since we have the same UVs on both sides for texture painting, we don't want symmetry on actually, right? That, I've actually noticed, can do some weird stuff when you're texture painting UVs that are on top of each other. Obviously, if they're not, and you have full asymmetrical texturing, you can have this off and on when you want it and need it. But since these UVs are on top of each other, and it's the same texture on both sides, I've noticed that sometimes symmetry being on for that could do some weird projection painting stuff. So in this case, when I have something like that, I make sure to turn the symmetry off. Now, one of the other things to remember, and this is going to be a little tricky for some of you, because I know you might have problems with your material preview on some of these devices. Let's hope it's not going to be that issue. But remember, if you put your cursor up here over kind of these brushes, you can scroll wheel, right? So you notice if you put over your kind of texture mask and use scroll wheel, you can actually scroll through these options here, right? Kind of cool. But you also notice that I have these up here, right? There's wireframe, there's the normal shaded. One more over is material preview. Material preview. right? Now I'm going to go back down to my little microwave briefcase, right? And we don't have to switch this, but I like to switch it back to Eevee for here. This will normally still just kind of basically use Eevee. But by switching into Eevee, you get to see other things like bloom, right? Or ambient occlusion or screen space reflections, right? We're not going to talk about those today because I'm just going to do some basic color map painting. But these can come in handy when we start to do glow and we start to do metal and reflective stuff. So for me, I like to, when I'm texture painting, kind of make sure my render engine's set back to Eevee instead of cycles, right? Eevee is Blender's real-time renderer, and it's a pretty darn good one. It's a pretty darn good one. But remember, it's that third of these balls that actually kind of does a full, proper material preview. You see how the actual normal map is doing what the normal map is supposed to do, right? It's kind of cool. I tend to not like the shadowing when I'm texture painting here. So one of the things you can also do is go to the little kind of V right here, because it's kind of at the end of these balls, right, the spheres. Click on the V, and I can just turn this off, right there. And that's kind of not using world space lighting anymore. So you see how it kind of provides a kind of even lighting. It's almost like there's a light on the camera. So when I'm just trying to paint, I kind of want to see the model pretty well and not factor in shadows or light or anything like that. In fact, you can turn your light off and on, things like that. We'll kind of talk about that a little bit later on next week. I'm not going to worry about that right now. But just a few little things like that that you might want to kind of check out and adjust. Right? Scene lights, you can have those on. In this case, I'm going to actually have those on because my light's off, right? So kind of a couple of neat little options and presets there. Scene lights is actually good to have on at some point just to see what lighting is going to do to your model. But so we'll talk about that next week, the next video. So now you can see that with Material Preview and Eevee, we get a nice actual look at the normal map, and you see how it actually looks like it's got that detail on there. Right? Remember, that's what a normal map does. If I zoom in close enough, you see how it's not actually changing the surface like it did when it was a sculpt. That's because there's not enough polygons to support that. But you'll notice that this does look like it's got detail on there, and you see how that kind of looks like it interacts with the light. If I move the light around, you'd see how the shadows would change on those. Remember, this normal map is really just a texture extracted from the high-resolution mesh that shows the normal details, right? The normals, but as pixels, and the light interacts with them like they're facing that direction. And it creates a pretty good illusion of detail on a model. All right. So how do we create a color map? Well, of course, we know we could do it through the shading workspace. But remember, our properties menu over here, right, has a lot of these little bars, right? We've seen kind of this one right here towards the top. Has some of our rendering options and our bake option. The very top one is really just your tool properties. You can kind of see the brush and your textures here, right? That's important. This is your rendering stuff here. We'll talk about that again at the very end. Not today, but like, in a week or week and a half. Of course, Blue Wrench has our modifiers. But if we go down to the bottom, remember there is kind of these two kind of reddish colored ones, right? They're kind of like not quite salmon. It's kind of like a in between red and salmon. It's a red though, right? And there's a red ball and there's a red checkerboard. The red checkerboard is for loading a texture in from outside. The red ball is actually your material. And you see when I click on it, because this ship object is already selected, you'll see the ship materials already selected also, right? So we've already got that ship material. It's already on here. In fact, if I scroll down, you'll see how there is something actually plugged into the normal map. See how our normal map's actually plugged in there because we did it through the shading workspace. So we actually do have something plugged into the normal map channel, the normal map, right? And we're going to see some stuff for emission, for glow, because it's a spaceship, so it should have some glowing parts, right? We're going to see that next week. We're going to do a bit with metallic and roughness, right? We dabbled with these on our first project, but we didn't really go into painting with them. We just kind of showed them as material properties. This time around, we're actually going to paint with them, right? Show you that you can actually paint pretty much any one of these can be painted as a channel here. And for a lot of them, Eevee does a pretty good job of showing them in real time, which is pretty cool. But I'm going back up to the top because really we're just starting with a color map today. And you can see that there is at the not at the very, very top of the material, but kind of close to the top, is a section called base color, right? Base color. Now remember, you can actually, if you're just looking for a solid color, you can actually just click on this kind of white bar and pick a color, right? You can, of course, do all of this stuff without textures. But you don't get really a lot of control over it, right? You really don't get the ability to say, hey, I want this part to be this color, this one to be this one. You can't really easily paint stencils or stamps in different areas. So if you're doing really something simple like a computer tower, okay, you could probably get away with that, right, for the color, and then just put a bump map on to give it a little bit of the kind of slight grainy bump that you'll see on those things. But oftentimes you want to create textures. So remember, there is that yellow dot, right? And you could do this through the shader workspace as well. But for me, unless you're doing more complicated stuff like the normal map thing, I just kind of do it through here, right? So I'm going to go to the yellow dot for base color. Click on that. I'm going to go to image texture. Now, we've actually seen this a few times, haven't we? We saw it on our last project. We saw it when we were actually doing our UV distortion grids, right? So we've actually seen this process a few times, right? So I'm going to go to image texture, and you'll see how it creates an image texture for me. If for whatever reason your material preview is not working well for you, right, you'll probably have to sacrifice the normal map temporarily, and you might go to your shading workspace and tell it to do texture, right? In this case, though, I've created the node but not the texture. That's why it kind of initially goes black, because you've plugged in the image texture node, but you haven't actually created a new texture yet. So that's when we have to click on New. That's when we have to click on New. I'm going to call this, I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call it Ship Color. Also, I feel like I should go higher than 1024, so I'm going to do a 2048. Remember, these factor by powers of 2. So if you want something bigger than a 1024, you should do a 2048. If you want something bigger than a 2048, it should be a 4096, right? That's just kind of they scale well and then kind of work with the scaling of rendering engines. So we've just kind of figured out we've kind of got these presets that we like, right? It should be square usually, right? So 2048 by 2048. Blank's fine, because that's what we want here. If you want a higher bit depth to get a higher quality texture, you can turn on 32-bit float. But that's also going to make a bigger file size, right? The bigger the bit depth, the bigger the file size. By default, these are usually 8-bit. That means 8 bits of information per color channel, red, green, blue. The more bit depth data you have, usually it can make it doesn't compress the color as much. You'll see that the transitions from different colors as blends and is smoother kind of stuff. But there's no right or wrong. It just depends on what you need and what resources you have, right? Nintendo Switch might be using 8-bit textures. ILM is using 32-bit floating point textures, right? It depends on what you need, right? We're going to keep the default 8 bits because our computers are not as powerful. They're not super powerful. Your devices aren't super powerful, so it's going to make sense for us to go efficient, right? To go efficient with this stuff. I'm going to pick a color, so I click on the color channel here. I'll turn up the kind of gray bar here, right? Because there's a little bar on the side here, so we're going to turn it up into the gray range so we actually can see the colors. And let me put that color there. Hold on, I'm going to put this microphone down. Okay, I'm back. Just had to answer a fun phone call. All right. But, it took a minute, so a bit of a minute of downtime. So pick the color here. Actually, I don't really want green. Kind of feel like maybe kind of something a little bit in kind of the blue range. Really, this can be kind of whatever color ship you want, right? And you can always make it lighter blue or darker blue by kind of controlling the little slider there. But remember, it's just click on that color, and then you just drag that gray bar up slider here to make it lighter or darker, and then you pick one of the colors. And it sets a hue saturation value. You can pick RGB, right? You got all these options there. And then I'll hit OK. And now we have our color map on here, right? So there's our color map. Now, generally what I do once I've created a map is we can kind of go over to here. And this is where if you have like something like bpainter, you don't have to worry about this as much. It's not a free add-on though, but it is a great add-on for texturing in Blender. And I know Blender is working on doing some cool new texturing updates in the coming 3 series. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what Blender stock is going to have there. But there is an add-on, bpainter. It's like about $40. It's a great add-on. It's awesome. It really takes a great texture painting tool set and gives it a proper kind of layer system and brush browsing system. It's image-based. It's pretty cool. Very, very good investment. So generally what I'll do is I'll come up here and you'll see that there is kind of the section here in the UV editor, really the paint editor, but it looks like a lot like our UV editor. That says ship normals, right? But you'll see right next to it is kind of that little browser window that's kind of got like a triangle, looks like a pyramid, and like a ball. Kind of looks like a landscape, right? Pyramid, it's kind of a sun, moon, I don't know. If you click on that, you'll see that there is the ship color. And that way you can actually see your ship colors here. I also usually go to image here, right? And you'll see that we can save the image. We'll go to save. And in this case, it already says ship color PNG. If you want to change it, you can there. If you want to change the file format, you can. If you want to change the color depth, right, the bit depth, you can, right? So you got some controls there. I think the defaults will be fine for us, though, so we'll save as image. And remember, I also the other day went to File, External Data, Automatically Pack Resources. That will pack these textures into your Blender file. That's important. That way this stuff comes with your Blender file when you turn it in at the end of the term. It also means that if I go up here and I go File, Save As, I could say this is a new one and say, hey, let's call this Spaceship Paint. Oop. There we go. And now we've got that in there. Now, if I go back to my wrench screwdriver here, right, it's the very top one, now you'll see that there is ship normals. So if I ever had to go back and actually modify the ship normals, I can. But you'll notice there is the ship color here. So I can kind of switch between the different maps I've got loaded on the model to paint them, right? Is it really a proper layer system? No, but once you understand that that's there, it kind of helps to be able to switch between the different map types you want to paint. So just to kind of do a little bit more before we stop, to do a little bit more with this color map, remember one of the things you can actually do is masking, right? And I'm kind of feeling like it might be neat to kind of have the these top engines at a minimum a different color, right? And we'll do a little more with this, and maybe this right here too. We'll kind of add a little bit of this color here. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to go to say like 3, right? And I'm going to select this face. And one of the cool things about Blender actually is once you have seams for your UVs, your select linked actually works on those. So see when I do select linked, it actually just grabbed just that UV shell. So if I was to go up here and do select linked, you see how it's actually a cool fast way to grab some of these sections. I'm just using the quick key I've set up for it, which I changed it to spacebar from right bracket because I use this a lot, and spacebar is closer to my left hand than right bracket is. I know some of you guys have done that already too. It's a pretty nice change. And I'm not an animator, right? Spacebar actually plays through your animation frames. I don't animate, so I don't care to have that quick key for that. So I figured I'd press it in the service for something I used a lot more. We see how linked actually works on polygons that aren't welded together anymore, but also it even obeys the kind of UV shells, the UV islands that we've created when we unwrapped it. So just by selecting those polygons, I went back to 3 for face mode. I can then go back to 8. Remember 8, that's one of our quizzes. It's also going to be on our final. 8 is texture paint mode. It's right here, right? And what I could do is right next to that mode, and right in between view, is what looks like a white polygon and kind of a transparent polygon behind it. If I click on that, that is paint mask. That means everything that's not selected in face mode is masked. I can't do anything to it. I can then go to fill bucket right here. Right? Remember, there's paint, there's soften, there's smear, there's clone, there's fill. Mask's kind of right there too. Some of the other features, but there's fill bucket. And what I could do is I could go, and I could either pick a color here or here. It's kind of up to you. Maybe go with more of like a gray color. And if I just click on those masked areas with that fill bucket with a different color, it actually just fills those in, right? It just fills those in. And that's really, really cool, right? So, and then you can turn it off to do regular painting. But I figure that'll be kind of a good place to stop in terms of, hey, we've got a color map created. We kind of went through some basics for setting this up again. I've added changes, so you'll notice if I look up here in the paint window, the 2D paint window, you'll see their image has an asterisk next to it. That means that this image has to be saved. So I'm going to go Image, Save, and it'll save that color image, right, because that's kind of the active one here as well, right? And then, of course, I could just save this because it's already set to paint. And now this is all saved. So obviously next week we're going to do more, but I figure that's a good start.